So thank you, as always, for joining the call. This is our third session in the series of the Little Church in the Home. And tonight, in the past few weeks, we've been talking about different elements of the church in the home, the spiritual life of the house, and how that flows into our life in the church, and vice versa. We've talked about sacred time and sacred space. We've talked about a little bit about prayer and reading the scriptures. We've talked about gratitude practice and forgiveness practice. So we've been talking about these different elements, but tonight, as kind of we've been going through this coronavirus quarantine and pandemic, we wanted to just give some reflections, because we've been talking a lot about this in our home. Some reflections on how the little church of the home can really keep us wholehearted during this time of the coronavirus, and really what Presbyter and I will discuss, and what we have been discussing, is how this is really a desert. This is really like walking through the desert. So we want to kind of take some of the things that we've talked about, explain what that idea of being in a spiritual desert means, and then applying some practical recommendations kind of from us. Not that we're holy people or anything, but just kind of things that we've talked about and have been discussing in our own home, and things that we think would help during this time. So we kind of want to take a more practical approach to what we're going through currently. So without further ado, I'm going to let Presbytera kind of get the discussion started.
Okay, so we wanted to start with this. So basically, we're thinking of COVID-19 and the shelter in place that we're all experiencing as a spiritual desert. And so the wonder is, when the desert fathers moved to the desert, some of them write about how much of a beautiful experience it was to be away from the world and having nothing. And other people who went to the desert wrote about it as a horrible experience. And I think quarantine can kind of be the same thing. And so I wanted to start with a story. When I had Panayoti, it was the first day of Lent. And so Father was gone literally every day of Lent.
Yeah, it was the Friday morning before Great Lent started.
And I just remember being home on my 40 days before I could take Panayoti to church. And even for months after, it was the first time in my life I had experienced long-term, long-lasting depression. And I've been getting seasonal depression since we moved to Chicago. And I talked to my doctors, like, oh, you need vitamin D, it's a lack of sunlight, all these things. But this was the first time that it lasted more than Panayoti. Father, do something, go take care of Panayoti. That this lasted more than a couple of days. And so I was talking with my spiritual father about it, and he was like, oh, I understand. Like, it's hard when you're by yourself, trapped in your house. You have no contact with other people because people are busy. And he requested that I read this book, Time and Despondency. And when I was really reflecting on, my experience as a new mom, I was looking at the quarantine and thinking, wow, this feels a lot like that. I can't go to services. I'm home alone with this new child. And just all the other struggles that I went through that, it's like, oh, this is like the quarantine's like everybody's like a new mom in their 40 days of being at home. And even after that, it's incredible how not having human connection and routine can do to us. And so in this book, I wanted Father just to read one short section, and it's right in the beginning. And the first time I read that, I just started crying. So I was like, oh my gosh, like, I like those 3 months.
Did you introduce the book already?
I did, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so he's just going to read for you a short little section.
Okay. So this is chapter 1. So this is literally the beginning of the book. Restlessness, rumination, torpor, sloth, distractibility, disinterest, despair. These are the symptoms of a ruthless interior sickness whose spiritual ramifications were first described by Evagrius Ponticus, 399 AD, a humble ascetic father deep in the Nitrian desert of Egypt. Writing to help his fellow monastics, Evagrius observed that some monks were unable to endure solitude, not to mention prayer, labor, or other quotidian tasks, for any sustained duration. So in other words, some monks went to the desert and they couldn't handle it. He would find them outside their cells, visiting others or staring listlessly at the sun. They disdained their surroundings and any tasks placed before them. As Evagrius monitored these monks, he came to realize they suffered from a crippling inward condition that gradually drained all vitality from their lives. In their ennui, monks sought to escape through excessive sleep, socializing, or aimless reading. Yet even these pastimes quickly lost their appeal, pushing the monks further into their desperate, anxious idleness. Evagrius gave the beast a name, Akidia. In English, I use the term despondency. It evokes for me the sticky web of sadness and rumination, the strange laziness and passivity of our entire being, which always pushes us down rather than up. The apathy of despondency is not to be confused with apathia, the condition of being untethered to passions and demons, which the fathers praised. In despondency, we fail to care about things that should actually matter to us, such as cultivating a life of spiritual effort or seeking the well being of our neighbor. Once apathy infects one corner of our lives, it quickly metastasizes elsewhere. As soon as we start neglecting prayer, we find it easier to disregard our chores or our children or the homeless man on the street. Beneath the many symptoms, Evagrius believed despondency arises from desire and anger. Anger toward what is present, desire for what is not. Out of this two-pronged dissatisfaction comes a lack of care, a total apathy and indifference. Yet I think we could also say that there is something more primary than desire and anger at stake: pain. Anger is a covering for our pain. We stop caring when we are wounded by the laceration of existence, whether that comes in the form of sadness, fear, disappointment, or shame. The human condition, the condition of bearing the image of God in a world of brokenness, could be summed up as learning to live and love in the midst of pain, learning to dwell where there is shame, toil, and adversity. And I'll just skip a little bit ahead. There's another great thought here. When our minds abandon the pain of caring, our spiritual tendons grow slack. We lose the capacity to focus, behold, encounter, and love, which likewise provokes a toxic kind of emptiness, a vacuum that attracts all manner of distraction, restlessness, rumination, anxiety, fear, and lethargy.
So that's a lot. And when I read that, I highlighted like the whole thing, but I went back to my spiritual father and, told him like, I don't know how to get out of these things when I go into these like sadness spells. And he was like, well, you know, I think that we begin first by having specific extra prayers that you're going to say a day. And that didn't make any sense to me. And so as I read on in the book, it's really fascinating. The author writes first about how important it is to push through prayer and prayers that your spiritual father prescribes to you whenever you can, because it protects you from this apathy, this lethargy, the anxiety that comes later, that inward just like sticky web of awfulness. And so with that, what I thought and I really appreciated is that she also states that a lot of times if these things don't go away with prayer, that like we have to realize that we are psychosomatic, like mind, body, and soul, that we should also, when we're in these spiritual deserts, like we are right now in quarantine, we are in a desert where we're not around anyone, we're in the middle of nowhere, except for our families, but to also really, that's not funny, you're my desert. But to also just say like, it's also a good thing, and to look at what therapy can offer and what the world has to offer too, because therapists are trained for those specific things. So he had suggested first talk with the spiritual father and work on your spiritual life, but to also talk to professionals because they offer a different kind of toolkit that deals specifically with the mind. But these struggles go down deep into the soul. And so we see these in our children all the time. Even Panayoti has been refusing to go play outside with me. We go to like a empty soccer field and throw a ball. Can you change it for him? And he's lately not been wanting to do it. And it's really incredible to me that my 3-year-old, who's so active, is feeling listless because we don't have the normal rigor of our routine. So it affects everybody and it affects us on a soul level. So remembering that he needs prayer too, and that it's okay to reach out to doctors. So we were thinking about what a spiritual desert looks like um, in in a coronavirus, and so we just wanted to kind of go through some of those. So I'm going to pass off to Father
Yeah,
Dimitri.
so I think a lot of the things that we read in that passage and talking about Evagrius and his observation of the monks, I think the temptation or the potentiality of experiencing those same things, those same emotions, those same kind of side effects of that akidia are all, the conditions are present in the coronavirus quarantine. So in other words, the purpose and the meaning that we derive from our day-to-day life has been kind of stripped away. The things that for many of us, the things that we find most valuable in our life, a lot of those things have been kind of stripped from us. Whether that's, our work, whether it's going to work, whether we're working from home, many people have lost their jobs. Whether it's a student, not being able to attend school and having to do e-learning.
And if I could just add to that, there's extensive research with teenagers specifically, and when they don't have strong peer relationships, when they don't have interaction, that's where they derive most of their meaning in life. And so when that's taken away from them, it makes sense that a teenager is going to want to sleep all day or fall into listlessness or even depression for a small period of time. Because we all, even if we don't have diagnosed chronic issues with these things, we all fall into these things from time to time. That's a normal reality for humans.
Yeah. So, some other things again that have been taken kind of from us very suddenly, whether it's our children and their activities, their sports. Many of our youth kind of identify as athletes. Their seasons have been canceled. Some of them may be musicians. Some of them may be, artists whose shows and concerts have been postponed. Those things where we derive meaning from. Another thing, right? Our churches are closed. Services are taking place behind closed doors. And thankfully, we have the opportunity to live stream them. In other countries, like in Greece, they're not even doing the services. The priests are not allowed to go into the churches.
In Ethiopia, you were saying that in Ethiopia, you have like a bunch of watchers there.
Oh yeah, one of the things we found out on our Facebook stream, on our live streaming, is that we actually have the 8th most common location where people tune in from our service is actually a village in Ethiopia. So like, kind of interesting side note. But in certain places, they're not even doing the services just because for the safety of the people. So at least we have the opportunity to offer services digitally, but like a lot of people derive value and meaning from coming to church, as they should. But now that's been taken away from 99%, 99.9% of our Orthodox population. So the conditions are kind of there to fall into this trap of akidia. And on top of it, our routines have been destroyed. We find ourselves in the company of our family 24/7, which we're not used to being. We're not used to being in that situation. It can, when you have the same group of people, there's going to be difficulties. That's just life. And so we like I said, the conditions are kind of ripe for this akidia to take root in us, and that's, I think, would be the worst case scenario. We've also seen, kind of as this quarantine goes on, some self-destructive habits among people. I know, like Presbitera had told me when everything was kind of getting big, she had gone to Costco just to like stock up, not panic buying, just like basic things.
Because we buy diapers and milk every week.
Yeah,
so I quarantine by every week.
So she had gone, and there was a gentleman who had like a whole shopping cart full of liquor, like literally entirely full of liquor. And maybe he's a restaurant owner or whatever, or a bar owner, and he needs to buy his liquor. But, the reality is that some people are going to fill the void of meaning with destructive behaviors. There's been a lot of very funny memes, and we laugh at them, but of like Presbitera was telling me one she saw was like a walrus, and it's like this is going to be me when quarantine is over, because that's another way that people kind of fill the void is with food, eating and eating and eating and eating. Another pitfall of this akidia is just like boredom and listlessness and just like passing the time with, 10 hours of binge watching a Netflix show or whatever it may be.
Or for our kids, even video games, right?
Video games, right, for our kids. And not to say that those things necessarily are bad, but when it literally consumes half of your hours of your day and becomes an obsession, then you're just filling the void with something meaningless. And that, for us as Christians, is self-destructive. Um, and those things lead to a deepening of our anxiety and kind of moving into that depression realm. So that's kind of where we want to stay away from. As Christians, we need to be aware of these things and let our church in the home, because that's where we are now, right? That's where we are. We're not really able to go anywhere else. Allowing our church in the home to guide us and to keep us wholehearted during this time where I think it would be very easy to kind of fall apart. Another interesting thing that I had heard, and some people on social media some people on social media had referred to it, is that during times of quarantine and isolation, divorce rates go up, which is sad. Obviously, very sad. When husband and wife literally can't manage to be together, and the stresses and anxieties of day-to-day life become so great that their marriage falls apart. It's a reality. It may not be a high percentage of people, but it's a reality. So yeah.
Oh, so how do we combat this? Like, these things are all here. So how?
Sorry, I couldn't rephrase what that is saying. Forgive me. So now let's talk about some of these practical things, kind of ideas, recommendations that we have for you all in your church of the home to kind of combat this fight with akidia, to not fall into that trap of akidia. And kind of leaning on the experience of the Orthodox Church through the centuries, leaning on the spiritual fathers, on what things that we can do, tangible and practical things that we can do to kind of keep, like we said, keep us wholehearted during this time of isolation and time of difficulty. So the first thing that were just, as we were putting this together, we were discussing is that it's really important, especially in family scenarios. If you have children in the home, if you have grandchildren that you're talking to on Zoom or video calling or whatever, to talk about it. Not so much to talk about the coronavirus and what's happening, because I think personally, I'm tired of talking about the coronavirus. It is what it is. It's the situation we find ourselves in. But to talk about the struggles that we face in our day-to-day life, to talk about, our listlessness, our restlessness, our boredom, our anxiety, to bring these things out into the light. And President, you had expressed kind of nicely kind of why that's important.
Oh, just again, Brene Brown, my best friend. She has this really nice quote on shame and how shame doesn't hold power over you when you talk about it. So when you talk about these things, it's the first step in understanding that they exist. So by even you expressing to your children, like, oh man, like, I was so bored today. Like, I wonder what I can do tomorrow to not have this feeling, because it's an icky feeling. It gives your children the permission to also say, like, I was also so bored today, or I really missed being with my friends today. And obviously, like, we don't want to share everything about ourselves with our children, but to be open with them, and to let them be open with you about how these things are there, because it starts to diminish their power when we acknowledge that they exist.
Yeah, and from a biblical perspective, as a Christians, the Bible tells us that, bear one another's burdens. So if we're struggling, if we see that our families are struggling, and we talk about them, we can carry the burden together, right? It's not something where, as a parent or as the head of household or whatever it may be, we should be carrying our burdens alone, because they'll crush us. So and it may be that your children or grandchildren or whoever it is in your family are dealing with things that they don't feel comfortable processing by themselves, but they also don't feel comfortable sharing. But if we can kind of open that conversation and have that open conversation in the home, it gives a groundwork for where that processing can take place and allow everyone to do it together. So that was kind of just the first thought that we had on why why it's important. And there's a great resource that we recently learned about. It's an Ancient Faith podcast. I think we've talked about Ancient Faith before. If not, Ancient Faith Ministries is a really great resource. And there's a podcast called Healthy Mind, Healthy Soul, and it talks a lot about the kind of where the meeting points between the spiritual life and kind of the field of psychology, and where the mind and the soul interact. And they actually have a couple of recent podcasts about the coronavirus situation as well, and some very good things. I was listening to one of them before we started today. So that's the first thing. And that podcast, again, along with all the resources on ancient faith, are good tools for you when you have those discussions to kind of look for inspiration, look for talking points, and things that you can install in your own home
Or
to help you.
even like with older children, once you listen to it, if you think, oh, this is something that might be interesting for them to listen to, like let that be your Sunday school that day. Listen to that podcast and talk about it.
Yeah. So that was the first thing, is make your home a place where you can be open about the struggles that you're having. Again, not just with coronavirus and what's going on in the news, but your fears, your anxieties, your struggles with restlessness and all these other things. So
just and then a few other quick tips for kids, and even helpful things for us as well. There are some great phone apps that tell you how often you're on your phone, and it's really distressing when you're like, oh my gosh, I did not realize I was on Facebook for 5 hours today. Like, that is really distressing if it's 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And letting your kids just share that out at some point with you, like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was on this video game for so long. Because I do think we don't realize how much time we spend when we have all the time in the world. It slips away from us and we don't actually use it at all, which again, I'm not accusing anyone, because these are my struggles too.
Yeah.
And then really, after you limit set the things that push us in our listlessness, like what are we filling the void with? Set a limit on those things, because it's going to be different for everyone. And then really building in the prayer and reaching out to a spiritual father to ask what prayers you should be saying when you're starting to have these icky feelings or despondency, and they'll guide you because they know you. Just like my spiritual father did for me.
Yeah, and to that point, I think part of the struggle is now there's like a big time void. We're not going to work, our kids are not going to school. They may have e-learning, but it's not like they're going to be spending 9 hours a day somewhere outside of the home. We're not going to be spending 12 hours a day at work. The activities are gone, the evening things are gone. So there's kind of this time void. It's like, oh, now what? Now what do we do with our time? And I think that the temptation is to just fill the time with anything that we can. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So to Presbytera's point, though, setting limits on how much we're checking the news and social media, I think helps a lot when it comes to fighting the fear and anxiety that come with akidia. I know personally, in the beginning when they were doing, I think they still are, but they were doing the daily press conferences, and it was like, 12 new cases in Illinois, 13 new cases in Illinois, 14 new cases in Illinois. It was like day by day, it was like going up just like a tiny little bit. I was following and tracking how many cases, how bad is this going to get? And I almost lost my mind. And then when you go on social media, so personally, I stopped using Facebook for any significant social media referencing for like a long time. Now that I'm at the cathedral with all of you, I've been using it more because the group is very expansive, so it's an easy way to connect with everybody, which has been great. But I also found, and I remembered why I stopped using Facebook, is because when you log on, you get that timeline in front of you, and you start scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Well, you find after an hour or two, you've read like 15 articles on the coronavirus and how we're all going to die. So I think we have to be very intentional about setting limits about how much we're on social media and how much we're on reading the news or checking the news. Obviously, we have to be informed of what's going on. I'm not saying to turn a blind eye to what the situation, but we can spiral out of control too when the news is always bad, when things are getting worse, and it can really absorb you, as it was absorbing me. So I speak from myself, from my own heart there, to really be careful about how much news and how much social media we're intaking during this time, because again, we're looking for something to fill the time, and those things can lead us down paths that we don't want to go if we're not careful, if we don't kind of tether in what we're doing. So now from there, those are
So
kind
if
of,
I can pause you
yeah.
one second, sorry. Which goes back to the thing we were talking about with sacred space and sacred time. I am not a scheduler, and I'm a hot mess most of the time. And so just making a daily schedule, like on a piece of paper and sticking it to your fridge, like this is how the time is going to be spent. It almost protects your time for your children so that they have an expectation, because that's what school does for them. It provides them with routine and structure. And even for me as an adult, it gives me a lot more peace, and I slip less into despondency when I force myself to schedule, even though I hate it so much. um,
Yeah, yeah. And to that point, every house is different, so you need to kind of
right.
look into your own house. But and where you may be a great scheduler, so that's not really an issue. But every family is going to be different too. So your obviously the needs of your home, you'll have to address those. So those are kind of just some kind of like basic. I mean, those really aren't any like Christian based recommendations. Those are just kind of like human living things to go by and maybe to help us a little bit. I want to get a little bit more though into, again, this life of the church in the home and how it can help us during this time. So I have three things. I have three things in front of me that I want to discuss. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is, as we've been discussing before, we have right now we have like a void. Um, a void with our time, a void with our meaning and where we draw it from. And I think our tendency and the temptation is to try to fill the void with stuff, with movies and TV, and as we've been talking about. My first recommendation for the spiritual life of the home is to avoid that reaction to fill the void altogether. And what I mean by that is to allow ourselves to stay in that void. And what I'm referring to is what we would call in our spiritual tradition is stillness. Um, Stillness really is a condition of the soul, at least the way that fathers of the church talk about it. It's a condition of the soul where um, there's peace, and where there's not a lot of movement, and that manifests itself physically, and it manifests itself spiritually and mentally. That peace, that stillness kind of just imbues us. But there has to be the conditions for stillness too. And now one of the positive things is that, again, a lot of the runaround and the rigor of our daily schedules has been removed from us. And it gives us an opportunity in the void to find room for stillness and silence. Now, why is that important, right? It's kind of countercultural, really. When you think about how we live our daily lives, the idea of being still is kind of crazy. But for us, it's very important. So the question is why? Why is it important? In the Bible, we hear, I believe in the book of Psalms, God tells us, be still and know that I'm God. There's another great biblical reference where he's speaking to one of his chosen people, and he's saying, you will experience a great rush of wind and the mountains will come down, but I'm not in the wind. And you will see fire rising up, but I'm not in the fire. It's to Elijah, right? Thank you. And so I'm not in the fire, and the earth, there will be a great earthquake, but I'm not in the earthquake. But then you will feel a gentle breeze, and know that that's where I am. I'm in the gentle breeze. So we have again this image of stillness leading to an encounter with God. Another image that we see in the Bible a lot that has to do with that is the mountaintop. Right? So before I met Presbytera, I had never been to a mountaintop because I'm from Chicago, so we don't have any mountains. But Presbytera's from Utah, and they have mountains all over the place. So one of the blessings of our relationship and our marriage is that whenever we go to visit Presbytera's family, we go hiking up in the mountains. And so I've had, checked something off that I never thought I would, climb the mountain. So when you get to the top of the mountain, you realize that nothing's going on there. It's very quiet, peaceful, total stillness and silence. There's a void there. There's a void of noise. There's a void of activity. But in the Bible, mountaintops are a place where humanity encounters God. So think Moses receiving the tablets of the law, right? God speaks to Moses on top of Mount Tabor, or Mount Horeb. I'm getting my mountains mixed up. Biblical
Mount
mountains.
Sinai.
Mount Sinai. Thank you. Duh. So Mount Sinai. So Moses meets God on Mount Sinai. Christ in the Transfiguration, right? That's Mount Tabor. Christ takes his disciples up to Mount Tabor and he reveals to them his divinity, the light of the Transfiguration. And many, many other examples of mountaintops being a place of revelation and encounter with God. And the reason is because it's a place of stillness. So in our own homes now, in the life of the church, seek out moments and opportunities to engage that stillness. I know for myself, so many times, Panioti goes to sleep, right? That's our opportunity for stillness, because when Panioti is awake, there's no stillness. So Panioti goes to sleep, Presbytera may have work to do or whatever, and I find myself on the couch, and my first inclination, I have two: to pull out my phone and check my emails and make sure no one has contacted me about something important, or to turn on the TV to find a sports game to watch, right? So our inclination is to, again, find something to fill that void. But if I can just stay in this moment of silence, it's an opportunity and a meeting place to encounter God. And that's hugely important, because when we encounter God on a personal and real way, it invites his grace into our life. And we had a Bible study about faith and grace too, where grace is really his life power, right? It's like his power of life that he gives to us freely. But we have to be able to encounter him. So the first tangible recommendation I have is finding time, and you have plenty of time now, for stillness and silence and staying in it. Resist the urge to run to your. Another one I heard from the Goyans is, "Oh, I cleaned this today. Oh, my mom and I cleaned this. My mom the other day was texting me. Do you need this? Do you need this? Do you need?" Because she was throwing things out. She was cleaning the garage, right? We have house chores we want to do, and those are important too. But again, resist the urge to fill all 24 hours of the day with things like that: cleaning, your phone, the TV, your computer,
Like
social media.
even with just starting, because this is where I'm at, just starting with even 1 minute, and
Yeah, that's literally what I'm talking about. Just a
a
few
timer,
minutes. Yeah.
and just saying, for 1 minute, I'm going to be still and be in the presence of God. I'm not going to think. I'm not going to pray. I'm just going to realize that the Holy Spirit is everywhere present and filling all things. He's always around me. I just don't see him because I have so many layers of things that, are blocking me from my relationship with God. So just even 1 minute a day to just
Get started. Yeah.
to be quiet, which is where I'm at. I'm at like the 30-second mark, maybe.
Yeah.
But start small.
Well, because again, it's not something that we're used to doing, so it may be challenging in the beginning to find, not to find it, but to like just stay in it, to relax your mind and your soul to a point where you can stay into that for any duration of time. There's a comment here: this is something to do as a family. Absolutely, 100%. Obviously, in our family, it's if you have little ones, it can be challenging. Obviously, we can exemplify and try to model for them that stillness and silence. But it's important to just to find it wherever you can. And really, my point is also to resist the urge to just do stuff just to do things, because I think a lot of times we derive value and happiness from doing things. We feel like, oh, we have, as long as we're being productive, then we're doing our part. But resist the urge. If you have an opportunity to be still and silent, take it, because it's huge.
We do this. Your kids probably know about this from camp. This is like a big camp thing. Like they have, I think somewhere upwards of like 15 to 30 minutes where they just sit in the presence of God. They walk around the camp. They all have their own space.
I think it's after their morning prayers.
After morning prayers and before breakfast. And they just try their best to keep their mind clear of thinking about stuff and to just realize that God is always around us.
Yeah, and literally you'll see a bunch of kids just sitting on the ground all over the camp. And if someone walked in and didn't know what was going on, they would think that something crazy was happening. But it's really a beautiful thing, that they're taking that opportunity to find that stillness and silent time to encounter God. So that's the first thing. In conjunction with that, the two kind of centerpiece practices of the church in the home are also, I think, very helpful during these times. So the first thing I'll talk about is fasting. Obviously, this is a time of fasting in our church. Um, I'll kind of preface with saying that everyone fasts differently. It's really something to be decided with your spiritual father who knows you and can prescribe to you what you're able to do. And with your health, depending on your health, you may not be able to fast at all from foods, at least. But remember, fasting is not just foods; it's really refraining from sin, and turning back towards God. And now, fasting is important to me in this scenario, in this situation, and maintaining, especially the Lenten fast, is important because it's an it's actively not seeking meaning or happiness in things that can't give them. So, in other words, food is something that's very important. It has a lot of meaning in our
Especially for
homes.
Greek people.
We're Greek, right? Food is really important to us. It's a thing that unites the family. It gathers the family. The kitchen is usually the center point of the home, and whether it's the mother or the grandmother or the father, that's the kind of the central cook figure. They're beloved because of their offering, their love offering through their food.
I mean,
So
food is the center of our liturgy. Right. Our whole church life is centered around the Eucharist.
Absolutely. And so we understand that food is important and has meaning. But fasting is an opportunity to really give the food even more meaning because it sanctifies our eating to God. It's an offering of what we eat and that time that's so critical and valuable to our family lives, and offering that to God. Another way we can think of it too is that we kind of are able to, through fasting, to reorder our natural desires and to sanctify them as well. So in other words, if I have if my natural desire is to eat constantly, right, during this time, if I'm using food as an opportunity to kind of cope with what's happening,
or just out of boredom, or just
yeah,
whatever. I mean, I stress and bored eat all the time.
Fasting is a great way to put that natural desire in its proper place, and it's to reorient it towards God, so that we don't kind of fall off that track, so that we don't, first of all, health-wise, so that we don't turn into walruses throughout this scenario, which is a
silly meme.
Well, but after Pascha, it's a distinct possibility, right?
But that's blessed eating. No calories in Holy and Bright Week.
Yeah, no calories. Feast of feast. So, so fasting to me is something we can do, something simple we can do to offer ourselves to God, to keep our lives oriented to Him through one of the things that's really most central to our family lives, which eating. I mean, if we think about eating, it's literally what makes us up. It's literally what we put into ourselves to keep our life going. So when we're able to,
can I add a scenario on that? So just really cool thing. St. Paisios, I think in Spiritual Warfare, I can send you guys a little excerpt online. He talks about how fasting becomes a little bit of a fortifier on the weak parts of our wall. So for example, he's saying every person's like a fortress wall, and wherever the weak spots are, that's where the demons try to hit us. So we tend to fall into the same sins over and over again because those are our weaknesses, and he calls those the weakness on the wall. So when we fast, it's almost like we are practicing denying something that we want, so that when other struggles come, like some of the struggles that many of us are having in this coronavirus self-quarantine stuff, it fortifies you, and it fortifies the parts of your wall that are weak. And that's going to look different for everyone, whether you're prone to feeling angry about the situation or depressed, whatever it may be. Prayer and fasting become the extra, pieces of wood to strengthen that wall or stone.
Yeah, and St. Paisios himself was a very extreme faster, even from his youth. So, and first of all, he knows from experience, but again, not all of us are going to fast the same way. So please talk to your spiritual father about your fast regimen if you haven't already, and engage in this practice. It's not something to be afraid of. I know a lot of uh, Greek people, especially, don't like fasting, or
Because
they're
food's the center of
right.
the culture.
Yeah, exactly. But it's something that's really important. So that's the first thing, or that's the second thing. So stillness and fasting. Um, and then the third one kind of connects all three together, which is our prayer life. So in my Bible studies and in the Orthodox study hours that we've been doing, I've talked a lot about situations of God's grace, of God's protection, of repentance. We've talked about the other day. We talked about Jonah and the Ninevites who were saved, and in all of these scenarios where God kind of interacts with His people, prayer is one of the. It's really like a cornerstone of the spiritual lives of the people that are encountering God. So, um, a lot of our discussions as clergy in our metropolis, we've had a lot of meetings the last couple of weeks, obviously with everything going on, trying to decide what's going to be the best course for our metropolis and the faithful. There's been multiple references to what we're going to and the similarities that we're experiencing now to like war times. And obviously it's not the same situation. Like people are not getting, drafted and sent away to Europe and fighting to the death, on battlefields. But a lot of the scenarios that we're facing have similarities with those times. So in war times, if we're going to use that understanding, everyone does whatever they can, right? Everyone in society offers whatever they're able to the common good. Um, so whether, in World War II, the men went to fight the war, the women went to work in the factories, right? So that's an example, right? They went to work and they were building the weapons and whatever else was needed for the war times. Now what we're going through, the doctors and the nurses and the medical professionals are kind of like those soldiers on the front lines. And the rest of society is aiding, first of all, by staying home and quarantining, but also by making masks, right? Like that's a small thing that people can do to kind of aid the effort, right? Or making food for people who need it, or providing doctors with meals, and et cetera, et cetera. So everybody kind of has to do what they can. So um, as citizens of the country and of our local, whether it's our state or our town, um, our job to kind of help the effort is to stay home, and if we can support in these other ways to do it. But as Christians, we understand that our responsibility to aiding the effort, so to speak, goes beyond that. And one of the things that is part of our responsibility is to offer our prayers. So this time, not only being our holy days of the year, Holy Week and Pascha coming up, but really going through this difficult situation as a world, I think about the whole world that's been really pulled into this. Our responsibility is to pray. That's how, as Christians, we take up our arms during this time, to pray fervently. And again, just like with silence and stillness, it may be for 1 minute a day. Your prayer may only be for 1 or 2 minutes a day. But that prayer helps. Every little bit helps. Because God, when we offer prayers from our hearts with sincerity, He hears them. He doesn't turn His back on us. And so we have to, just like we have to find time for stillness to encounter God, we have to pray as much as we can, whether it's 1 minute or whether it's 5 hours, for the ascetics, right? Like the monks, I'm sure now, the monks and nuns now, I'm sure are praying constantly for the sake of the world. A couple of just kind of practical things on that. So understanding that really our purpose and our responsibility as Christians is to pray during this time. So there are prayer services that we can do. For example, praying at night, the Compline services, whether it's the great or small Compline, you can find those on goarch.org. Whether it's praying a supplication service or a paraklesis to Panagia, to the Holy Cross is another one. There's also a saint that's kind of been the central intercessor for the coronavirus pandemic, which is Saint Nikiforos the leper. You can find his paraklesis online too.
We can share that link too.
Yeah. So So there are certain services that we can do, but even if, again, if our experience is not there, or we're not able to do a whole half an hour service, acathists are very good too. You read the acatist of the Panagia, just like we do on the Fridays during Lent, or if
And
we
if you
do,
just read the stanzas, it's only
yeah,
like
just the
10, 15
stanzas, yeah,
minutes. We can send you
what
like
we're
the
talking
exact
about.
thing for
Yeah.
those things.
So those are services that you can do. But if you find that it's too much, don't overburden yourself because you're burnt out. Just picking up your komboskini or just going in front of your icons and just praying, simply saying, Lord Jesus Christ, be with your servants, the doctors, the medical professionals, those who are sick, those who have lost family members due to the coronavirus. And then just saying over and over again, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on your servants, referring to the ones you've prayed for just now, and doing it as long as you can. Again, whether it's 30 seconds or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, saying it over and over again to offer your prayers, your concerns, our fears, our anxieties to God. Because at the end of the day, the way that we fight akivia and the fear and anxiety and the listlessness and the boredom and all these things that we were talking about, the despair, is also to offer them to God, right? To take them and to trust in Him that He will handle the situation. That He, uh, through our faith and through our prayers, will act. That He will lead us through. Just something you wanted to add. So again, whether it's doing prayer services as a family, whether it's doing prayer services by yourself, whether it's just praying simply in front of your icons and doing the Jesus prayer. You can also pray in the same way, Most Holy Theotokos, save us. You can pray to any saint that you feel close to. Saint Dimitrios is my patron saint. I can say, Saint Dimitrios, intercede for us. I can say it 20 times, whatever it is. We can pray for those who have died. We can say, Lord, give rest to your servants, and just say it over and over again. So using our komboskini, the prayer rope, or just praying in front of our icons for as long as we can. If you don't have a komboskini, another nice thing you can do is just set a timer for as long as if you have your phone or a timer near you, set a timer. Say, I want to pray for 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes. Oh, and that's how long I want to pray. Setting the timer and praying until it beeps, and then you're done. I think it's important for us, though, to understand that we really do have a responsibility, a social responsibility to the world, to keep our prayers up and to be diligent and intentional in our prayers during this time. And in that way, connecting the life of the church, the big church, to the life of our little church in the home, to the life of the whole world outside of our homes. And so in that way, we can do our part. We can draw meaning from our prayer and our connection with God during this time of distress. So, sorry, I know we're almost at an hour at this point, so I don't want to keep you guys too much longer. But those are just kind of our thoughts on how we can kind of allow the life of the church and our little church in our homes to really, again, keep us wholehearted, to keep us from going down paths that we don't want to go, from being consumed by boredom and listlessness and anxiety and fear, which I think right now it's very easy to fall into those things. So if there's any questions or comments, I know we covered a lot of ground. We talked about a lot of things. If there are any questions or comments, please unmute yourself. I don't want to unmute everyone because then sometimes it gets a little noisy, but if you have anything you wanted to add, please feel free to unmute yourself and then ask your question or your comment, and then we can address it or just add to the conversation in that way. Presbytera, did you have anything you wanted to add? I talked for a while. I talked for a while there.
What about Presbytera Tula?
I talked for a while there at the end. So.
No, I think the churchy things are good for you to talk about.
Thanks, Presbytera. All right.
And thank you guys too. Just reading some of the comments, we appreciate your time because, even though we're on quarantine, time is precious. It's hard to come by.
Yeah, absolutely. So we thank you. Next week, we're not going to do any sessions. It's Holy Week next week. So our focus should be on the liturgical life of the church, of course. So we're going to be streaming all of our services. The schedule is going to come out shortly if it hasn't already been sent out. So please stream the services in your home, and then focus on your prayer and your spiritual life of your little church. And then sometime after Pascha, depending on how long we're still in shelter in place, then we can continue them depending on the need and the desire. So thank you all. God bless. Kali Anastasi. Don't forget, my last tip is, don't forget, even if we can't come to church on Anastasi is still a reality. Celebrate it in your homes with joy. Light your candles in your home when you're watching church. If feast on Pascha, don't be sad, because it is the feast of feasts and the celebration of all celebrations. So we can't lose that essence. We can't lose that ethos just because something difficult is going on. Really, it's the message that we're going to get through it. Anastasi is that message, right? Like,
So if
no
I
matter
can
what,
I
no matter what, like, God will conquer in the end. So,
just to share as a parting thought, one of my job shares grew up in Romania during communism, and she used to secretly sneak in when she thought no one was looking to light a candle on Sunday mornings, and that's the best she could do because it was not it was really looked down upon, and people got in a lot of trouble, put in these awful prison camps for going to church and things. And so she had said on Pascha, they used to go to the church, quickly light a candle when they thought no one was looking, and then they would go as far as if they could into the mountains, I think near Moldova, and they would have a secret picnic, and whatever they had in their house, they'd put in a basket, and then they would go, and whatever family members could come would go. And I was like, okay, so for 20 years of her life, that's how she celebrated Pascha. And like, just feeling like Pascha still is there, and Christ is still with us. Like, it doesn't change the fact that Christ resurrected and defeated sin for us. It's hard and sad. Don't get me wrong. I cried a little bit when they extended the shelter in place, but we'll do our best.
Just to be clear, if you come to sneak in and light a candle, the doors will be locked. So don't come to church. But you can light a candle electronically. You can send us the request and we'll take care of it. But celebrate. Christ is risen. No matter where we are, Christ is still risen. So with that, we'll leave you all. Have a good night and God bless.
Bye, guys.